Scary True Home Alone. Stories that will terrify you. Story 4. The Boiler Room, the Barking Dog, and the Locked Door. Lucas had always enjoyed the quiet moments when his father was on one of his long night shifts. It was a routine he had grown accustomed to. The house, a modest 2-story structure at the edge of town, stood like an old friend, comforting in its familiarity. But there was something eerie about being alone in that house at night, something that always made him uneasy, no matter how many times he tried to convince himself otherwise. The silence could be unsettling, the kind that left you hyper-aware of every little sound, every creak and groan the house made. One evening, Lucas found himself alone in the house again, settling down with his dog Layla in the living room. The TV was off, the evening still and quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Layla, a scrappy mutt with a keen sense of hearing, lay beside him on the floor. She was always content during these quiet evenings, curled up with her head on her paws, keeping him company. But that night, something felt different. It began with a low growl, a soft rumble from Layla that made Lucas glance down in surprise. She wasn't the type to growl at nothing. Her gaze was fixed on the door leading to the basement, her body tense, her ears perked up. It was an unsettling sight. Lucas shook his head, trying to dismiss the feeling of unease that settled over him. Just a raccoon or something, he muttered to himself as he tried to focus back on his book. But Layla wouldn't stop. She began barking now, her voice sharp and insistent, rattling the silence of the room. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something wasn't right. "Layla, what is it?" he asked. But the dog didn't stop barking. She was fixated on the basement door, her body shaking as she leapt to her feet, running in tight circles. The basement was always a source of unease for Lucas. It wasn't that he was afraid of the dark, but there was something about that room, the heavy door, the old boiler that rattled and groaned, the sense that something was hidden down there, that made him nervous. Layla had never acted like this before. He stood up, walking over to the door with hesitation, his heart racing with every step. The house was quiet again now, except for the soft thudding of Layla's paws on the floor, which continued to pace nervously behind him. When he reached for the doorknob, he froze, feeling an inexplicable chill run down his spine. He hesitated, but forced himself to turn the knob, expecting the familiar creak of the old door. But the door didn't open. Lucas pushed harder, his fingers slipping over the smooth, cold brass. The door had always been a little difficult to open, but tonight it felt different. It was stuck in a way that shouldn't have been possible. He rattled the knob again, but it refused to budge. His breathing quickened. The feeling of unease shifted into something more intense, more primal. It wasn't just the door that was locked. It was the sudden awareness that something was wrong, something was inside. Layla continued to bark, a low, frantic sound now, as if urging him to do something. Lucas glanced down at the basement window next to the door. The blinds were drawn, but there was something unsettling about the way the shadows danced behind them. He stepped back, his thoughts racing. He had to check. With a deep breath, he grabbed the nearby flashlight from the counter and aimed it at the basement window, illuminating the thick glass with a cold beam of light. As his eyes moved over the glass, something caught his attention. A shadow, something just outside the window, shifting unnaturally. His blood ran cold. For a second, it was still, just a figure standing outside in the pitch black, barely visible through the foggy glass. Then, just as quickly, it moved. The shadow darted away from the window with an unnerving speed. Lucas felt his heart leap into his throat, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He turned sharply, looking at the basement door again, his body frozen in place. The sound of Layla's frantic barking now seemed to pierce his chest like a warning bell. Something was out there. Something was trying to get in. Without thinking, He raced to the basement window and yanked the blinds open, his breath catching in his throat. There was nothing outside. The yard was empty, silent, but his instincts screamed that he wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It wasn't the outside that had him terrified. It was the feeling that something had been in the house with him, something he couldn't see, couldn't explain. The door had been locked from the inside, and the figure outside had moved with a speed that suggested it had been waiting for something. For him, for the right moment. Panic surged through him, and he turned to run back to the door, to escape the feeling of being trapped. But just as he reached the door, a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor below him. The basement. The noise continued, a steady dragging sound punctuated by something that felt like footsteps. Lucas stood frozen, staring at the basement door. His mind raced. There was no logical explanation. Who or what could be down there? The dragging noise grew louder, closer, until it was so near, it felt like the whole house was shaking under the weight of whatever was down there. Without another thought, Lucas grabbed the phone off the table and dialed his father's number. His hands shook as the phone rang, the noise echoing in his ears. It was late. His father wouldn't be home for hours, but the call went straight to voicemail. "Dad, please pick up," Lucas muttered under his breath, a knot in his throat. His heart raced as the dragging sound grew louder, and his eyes darted back to the basement door. That's when it happened. The door to the basement rattled, a violent shake that nearly knocked it off its hinges. The lock held, but the sound of something, someone, trying to break in sent a jolt of pure fear through Lucas. He wasn't sure what was happening anymore, but he knew he couldn't stay there. In a panic, Lucas backed up, his breath coming in short gasps. He grabbed Layla by the collar and yanked her toward the stairs, his heart hammering in his chest. They had to get out. Get out before whatever was lurking down there found them. But just as he turned to run, he heard it. A voice, low, whispering, almost a murmur right behind him. "Don't run!" The hairs on his neck stood on end and he whipped around, expecting to see something. Anything. But the basement door stood still, silent now. The voice, though, lingered in his mind, echoing through the emptiness of the house. With trembling hands, Lucas reached for the door, still locked. His fingers shook uncontrollably as he backed away, the voice still hanging in the air. It wasn't until he was safely outside the front door, Layla barking beside him, that he dared to look back. The house stood silent, dark, but Lucas knew something had changed. Something was inside. Something had been waiting. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the terrifying truth behind the basement door begins to unravel. What is lurking in the dark, and why does it want Lucas so badly? Don't miss the next part of this chilling story.